Because I'm looking at the page and it's not streaming anything live quite yet.
Well, YouTube says that we are live, and we might take a.
Okay. I'm looking at the page and it's not streaming anything live quite yet.
Well,
There we go.
YouTube says that we are live, and
I can hear the YouTube page now, like a few seconds later. So let's kick it off.
well,
There we go.
YouTube says that we are live, and
Jorge, can you hear me? I can hear the YouTube page now, like a few seconds later.
yeah, it's just I'm hearing an echo here, so let me get AirPods on.
Jorge, can you hear me? No, I think you need to close your YouTube page or put it on mute. Jorge?
Yeah.
Are we good?
We're good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can. It's funny.
That's
Anyway,
hilarious. Anyway, well,
how are
thank you.
you?
I'm all right. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for doing this. Thank us for doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is meant to be an informal conversation, right? And let's let's get into it. Since this is well, we framed this as though it's part of a series. We don't know yet if it's going to be a series, right? It depends on how this goes. I would love to make it into some kind of series. Um, the 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 thing is, if this is going to be the first of several, we may as well do brief intros, even though obviously you and I know each other, but just for the purpose of other folks tuning in, it might be worth talking about what we're doing here. You want to kick it off?
Sure. So I am Peter, longtime information architect turned UX person turned engineer turned starting a company that works builds AI products for customers right now. So that is me. I live in Madrid. I'm very excited about the technology, also pretty skeptical about all the hype. And yeah, I think Jorge, you want to do you?
Sure. So I'm an information architect. I've been doing user experience design work for coming on 30 years. It's been a while. But increasingly getting into more strategic things. And like you, I recognized fairly early on that AI was going to be a big transformational force in the space and have been exploring its implications ever since. Um, just a few weeks ago, I launched a new consultancy alongside Greg Petrov to help organizations, particularly small and medium businesses, find direction with regards to AI. And that is figure out what it's for and how they can actually put it to work in their companies. Like you, I think I would describe myself as an kind of skeptical optimist or something like that, where it's like I think that the technology has tremendous promise. I also think it's been vastly overhyped. And I'm trying to figure out what it means, and what are actual use cases that provide value as opposed to hype.
Yeah, yeah. We're basically two AI pros. No, we're not. All right. So when so we talked about this. We were like, let's have topics of our conversation, which is good because then you and me can both do some investigation, which is good because we're all learning and discuss interesting things. And we picked the first topic, which is probably the wrong topic to start with, but it's agents, right? The agentic, whatever, the agent wave, the McKinsey had a report, I think last week it was like enterprise must catch the agentic wave. And I'm like, guys, calm down. But at the same time, there is some stuff there. There is some stuff there that is real, and there are things to talk about. We organized it in a So the format of it, Jorge, right? So since this is the first one, I don't know if it's even interesting, but I know you have a few slides, I have a few slides. I do wonder if slides are a good idea, but then again, looking at our faces maybe also not a good idea. So we can start with that and then just chat.
Yeah, I do want to show a couple of slides just because I tend to think visually, and I have a couple of models, mostly that I want feedback on, and and it may be worth calling out that you and I bring slightly different perspectives to these
Yeah.
conversations, right? Even though we both share a background in information architecture, um, I think it's fair to say that at this point you are very focused on kind of the implementation side of things, and I'm more focused on the strategy side of things. Like, what does this mean? Not that either of those are mutually exclusive. Um,
Mhm.
uh, and in fact, I think that the conversation, you can't talk strategy without understanding implementation and vice versa. So
Especially for, yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, especially for this stuff, for this technology, which is also crazy and new. I mean, if we're going to build a website, we don't need to talk about the tech much because it's fairly straightforward, right?
Right.
But in the world of I also feel they go hand in hand. There's strategy, technology, they have to be super close.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and you say that we don't have to talk about technology when talking about the web, but you and I were both involved in the web in the early days when the technology was still fairly new.
Yep.
And a lot of what is going on is very familiar to me from that time. It's
Mhm.
like whatever feels like is the technology right now might not be the technology in a few years. It's a field that is changing very fast. And it just feels like the right approach is to be open-minded, but also hands-on with it, right? So I don't want to talk about things kind of in the abstract, which is why it's so valuable to have the implementation perspective in these conversations.
Yeah. And I want to share you my Claude experience from an hour ago. So tech and strategy, I think your deck actually follows nicely upon my deck and expands on it. And I'm like, oh my God, I just said deck and now everybody left the live chat. But shall I quickly go through mine and then you can do yours, which I'm very curious to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and let's see if I can even make this work. So I just have a few things. It's all fairly straightforward. Clearly, I clearly remember this. A few months ago, no, 6 months ago, everybody was like 2025 is the year of agents. And I remember the demos then that OpenAI came out with. And it was all about um, book me a trip. And I'm like, that's the least interesting demo you could possibly do. But I think where it came from was that from the technology side, they had started post-training reasoning models. And I think the reasoning models made it then possible to like start thinking about agents, right? So, but frankly, then it became the year of talking about agents where everybody was like, agents, agents, the agentic, whatever. But I feel like now it's July, it's the year of figuring out agents. And next year, these things will start having impact, although it's very distributed. And I think everybody's seen this, but Simon Wilson shared this definition from Hannah Moran, which is agents or models using tools in a loop, right? So the LLM model is calling tools, and it's just the tool gives some data back to the LLM model, which then it reasons about and it calls another tool, and then it gives some data back to the LLM model. It then reasons a little more and calls another tool. And that is a very simple circle, which ends up being a very powerful kind of simple construct. And again, the capabilities that made this possible, they're all fairly new since, I guess, mid last year. which is the model companies are training models to be good at these two things, right? So the first thing is planning and reasoning, which is you just give it a whole bunch of, what they do is they train a model, then they give it a whole bunch of planning and reasoning tasks where they kind of can evaluate the output and the model gets better at it. And similarly in tool use, you train the base model, then you give it a whole bunch of tool tasks of which we know what the correct output is, and then it gets better at it. And what you get at the end is you get the same model, but now it's fairly good at thinking things through. And that, when I say fairly, I think it's wildly good if you're an optimist, I think like us. But if you're a pessimist, it's like it's always going to get a lot of stuff wrong, right? So it's always like, when I say it's fairly good, it means it's both wildly good and gets a lot of things wrong. And the same thing with tool use. And I was looking for examples. A lot of the stuff that calls itself agents right now is really just kind of like the kind of no code workflow builder, which is look at my email, and if it's a sales inquiry, then send it here. That is not, I don't think that really is an agent, although I also don't care about the definition, but that's just a little workflow, right? The real kind of like agents that are out there, I feel, are at least the ones I've seen that seem to have real product market fit, or like the coding agents, which are wildly, bafflingly good right now. Then there's the research agents like Gemini, and all of the model agents companies, they all have one of these, right? So it doesn't really matter. But the research ones, I think they are pretty good and they have reasonable product market fit. So as in they are being used by people for real work. And then there's the more experimental agents like OpenAI Operator, which is I'm going to use the internet for you and click on buttons, which is an early preview and is not as wildly useful quite yet. All right. I'll end with one thing. I do have one more slide. And this is the thing that I keep thinking about lately when I'm using Cloud Code, I'm using these things. And I'm talking to clients, and a lot of times people think like, oh, can we just like make this whole workflow work? And I think one of the key reasons why the agents that have the best product market fit right now are these kind of Lego block engineering tools is exactly because they are Lego block tools. So they are simple things, simple little systems that are slowly being built into much more complex systems, but very observable, very, 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 I don't know how to say it, but like I don't believe you can just replace stuff in a company with an agent and you're going to wave your hands and it's all going to be okay, because real life is complicated. But I think you probably feel the same. But that's a few quick thoughts to kick off the conversation.
Well, this is great. It's a great
If
starting
anybody's in the
point.
chat, which I don't know, let me know if you do not want slides next time or if you do want slides next time. I don't know if it's helpful. I'm always doubtful.
Yeah, I should say there are a few folks listening to the live stream. If you all want to drop comments or questions in the chat, we are monitoring that.
Yeah.
So please feel free. These slides are very helpful, Peter. I think it's worth calling out that that definition that you had on that slide, models using tools in a loop, that comes from, or the way that I sense the genesis of that statement is it comes from maybe a position of wanting to simplify what can be a fairly muddled discussion. I think that a lot of folks are using that phrase agentic system or agentic AI, and using it to mean different things. So it's felt like it's a bit fuzzy. And there are good papers out there from pretty much all of the big providers, right? So you cited the Anthropic paper. There's one from Google. There's one from Microsoft. Um, and I see that phrase models using tools in a loop as being kind of like a distillation of what they all have in common, but there are nuances to each of those definitions, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I just wanted to start there because I think that it's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation was to try to get a better sense for myself about what we mean when we're talking about agents. Um, the tools bit, I think, is especially important because most people who at this point have had experience interacting with I think have done so, or what we understand by AI, right? Have
Mm-hmm.
done so by interacting with chatbots.
Mm-hmm.
And the scope of action of the thing that they perceive they are interacting with is constrained by the chat environment, so to speak, right?
Although
So
rapidly expanding, but yes.
it's rapidly expanding, but my point is, like, I don't think that people would have the expectation that when they fire up a Chat GPT window, that Chat GPT will know about what's in their email inbox, even though we know that that's kind of what's happening, right? Like it's starting to expand into that. So
Yeah.
if you want to draft an email, if you want to have Chat GPT draft an email for you, the assumption most people have, I think, is that they will prompt it, and then whatever it responds, they will copy and paste onto an email client.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
increasingly, what's happening is that the model providers or the product providers around this stuff are building bridges between the model and the email client in this example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we mean by tool use, right?
Yes. And then let's go back to that definition because it just really clicked with me. And I think the reason is there is levels of abstraction, right? And there is a level at which when you are, and I think it's the same reason why it's important for tech and strategy and business and everybody to work really closely together on this stuff. Because when you work on this, you really there's a series of things that you understand that people just don't. And the moment you go one level of abstraction up, um, it becomes magic. And suddenly it's magic and everything is possible and nothing is possible and nothing works and everything works. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I really like bringing it down to, yes, but this is how it actually works and this is what actually happens. And and it's not magic, you know?
Right.
Things, amazing things are possible and other amazing things do not work and will not work. Anyway.
Well, the promise of these things, and I think part of the reason why it's in so many people's minds, you've already brought up one of them, which is the fact that with the reasoning layer added onto the models, all of a sudden it becomes possible to do kind of more sophisticated planning of what the thing is going to do, right? And then there are emergent means to enable models to have access to tools outside of their context,
Yeah.
like a more open-ended way. Like there's this MCP thing that
Yeah.
we can talk about, right? Um, and when you understand the implications of what that means, all of a sudden other use cases become available, right? And the promise of an agentic system is much greater than a more I mean, I don't know even what we could talk about in contrast to an agentic system, but like maybe like a more passive one that doesn't have agency, where it's being prompted by the user and
I
provided
I
context.
think I think the contrast can be more of a designed workflow. And I say designed instead of hard coded, but like, like the typical thing is here's a workflow. I used to do this as a consultant. Like, we're gonna sit down with you for like 2 months and like write down your workflow, and then we're gonna automate this, right? And so there's a lot of consulting in there. And a little bit, I think that's a type of contrast with what at least the model people are thinking about agents. And I think what we see in the coding agents is you do not have to write down the workflow and analyze it, because if the model can learn it, the argument is if the model can just think it through and learn it, it'll end up being better. I don't think that's always true, but I think in some specific cases it's true. But we don't have to go there. But that's the thinking of the model companies. Like, instead of having to, the opposite of the agent is, I am gonna like work this out step by step and engineer every little step, be it with a few LLMs in there.
We might say that that's the aspiration, and I think that part of what we can talk about here is based on our experience, how close are we to the reality of that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that because you mentioned earlier the OpenAI use case around travel planning, right? Or what was it like? What
Yeah. Plan a
it's
trip to
like,
Amsterdam for me. It's
yeah.
really.
It's interesting that that use case comes up in examples, and I think it was in last year's WWDC that Apple announced those AI features that they didn't release, right? Like the kind of improved Siri thing. And
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, the use case that they highlighted in their video was around travel as well, right? Like where the person had like their mother was flying into town or something, and
Yeah.
they asked Siri, it's like, hey, when is this happening? And it somehow knew enough to figure out what it needed to consult to provide the answer, right? So that's the idea of like it's planning an approach and then tapping into tools, in this case, something like your calendar or searching the web for a particular flight or what have you, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I just don't think that is interesting. And that is where, you know what I think? It is really interesting to me to see, and again, I'm just going to be the Cloud Code promo dude in this conversation, right? It's very interesting to me to see the user experience impact, and like the experience of using one of the coding agents, and the way engineers are figuring this out and doing little things and learning a lot of very unexpected tricks and properties really of this new thing, which is an agent. And that is what I think is most interesting. It is a very new thing. It's surprisingly good at things that you wouldn't think it can do. And it's surprisingly bad at stuff that you would think it could do easily. And I feel like it's learning about this alien thing that nobody knew existed, and we don't know. So we cannot, you can't just come up with a use case and be like, oh, let me book a trip. I think that's the wrong way around. I think the right way around is build little things and stack them up as Gauss law, right? Like stack them up into more and more complex systems and kind of make yourself much more efficient. If that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it's this kind of,
yeah.
there's
Well,
interesting stuff happening.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the AI companies have chosen that use case to illustrate the potential. But and you're gonna hear no argument from me about the usefulness of something like Claude Code. That is the agent that I've had the most experience with so far,
Mm-hmm.
and I agree with you. It's really extraordinary, with the understanding that producing code is that's a use case in which these things can shine. It's just like it
It's
lends itself to the nature of the thing, right?
it's very well scaffolded. So coding has all these little tools and things and things and things. Like Cloud Code uses maybe 40 tools, but they already existed. because they were coding tools. So it's very well scaffolded by all this stuff that already existed to help, people.
Well, and the tool part, like the tool use part, it is tapping um, into tools that are part of the programming environment that have a fairly consistent API, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the easier use case. The thing is, that's not a use case that, pardon me, that's not a use case that most people can relate to, right? And this, this travel use case is one where it's like, okay, that's one that requires crossing multiple domains and finding information. Pardon me, finding information from different systems and using it in various ways. I alluded to having a model that I wanted to share with you, and I want to kind of switch gears and talk about that because I think it speaks to this, right? One of the things that I'm most interested in, concerned with right now, is helping clients identify what the use cases are where they can actually deploy these things in a valuable way for their organizations. And we already know that cloud code is really good, right? And you can say, okay, so if we need to create custom software, that's a really good use case. But that's not the only one, right? And I've been thinking about, like, well, how do I make sense of this? And I've been thinking about that phrase, models using tools in a loop, and trying to kind of pinch and zoom into it to unpack what it means. And that's what my little model does. So let me share that with you. And you see my
I
see my
just
screen?
saw it and it disappeared.
No?
I'm not seeing it now. It showed for a second.
That's annoying.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, here we go. It's back.
Yes. Okay. So this is my take on the phrase models using tools in a loop, right? So specifically, like, I want to understand what the loop is.
Yeah.
And this word agency implies kind of self-directed behavior. And you talked about it earlier, right? Like, one of the differences here is the contrast. I think you said that the contrast is that in the non-agentic systems, the user is designing the workflow up front, right? Or specifying the workflow. And the idea here is that you delegate more of that workflow definition to the tool itself, to the system itself, right? So
And
is
the
that fair?
execution, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, the execution for sure, and the fact that well, I've rendered the execution box red here because that is what current models. That's our experience with current models, right? Like, you fire up ChatGPT and you ask it about,
Yeah.
you ask it to, like, draft an email or something. So you're telling it what to do, right? So that's the step that most people have experience with. But what we're talking about when we talk about an actual agentic system is expanding that scope, expanding the parts that the system is responsible for to go beyond the drafting of the email or whatever, right? And the way I see it, there are 4 steps, of which acting is one of them, right? So the first step is setting the goals, right? Like, what is it that this thing is trying to do, right? And if you're if what you're doing is like booking a trip to Amsterdam or whatever, right? Like, the goal is to go on vacation or to fly to a conference or what have you, right? So there's a notion of, like, defining the goal. And then the next step is, once you know the goal, then basically write a plan for how you're going to get to the goal.
Yeah.
You can't act unless you have a plan, right? And so the system is writing a plan, then it's acting, and that implies, like we were saying earlier, having access to some kind of tool, right? So in the case of the travel agent system or whatever, it might be having access to a flight booking system via some kind of API, right? Then the next step is reflecting on the results of that action.
Yeah.
So it's like, did the thing accurately book the flight or what have you? And there's a feedback loop there. So the reflection might call for tweaks. Like the action might not have yielded the desired result, in which case you can go back to the plan. Or if it, if at a higher level it just is not getting you closer to your goal, then you have to do some kind of strategic reset, right? So it's like maybe we don't want to go to Amsterdam after all. Maybe we want to go to Belgium or what have you, right? So and I think that this loop is kind of what people do when they're trying to do something. And the question is, what are we delegating here to AIs? And what is different is that we are slowly, so we are already acting. We're already using LLMs to do certain things, right? To draft an email or what have you. That's already in place. What we're talking about is expanding the scope of action from that particular step, kind of expanding it outwards. And I've rendered it here as concentric circles because I do think that the scope of action is concentric. You talked about reasoning models. What the reasoning models do is basically they write a plan, like a plan of action, right? It's like I'm going to, the user is asking me for this thing. This is what I have to do. And you can see it like when it's doing the thinking thing, you can see it kind of thinking out loud about what, how it's going to go about this thing.
That's wild. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I have the impression they also reflect.
Yes, that's why I've included reflection in that circle, right?
Yeah.
I think that we're in that phase right now where the model where these systems are gaining the ability to both plan and reflect on how the thing went. I don't think we're quite there yet on the set goals, the set goals part of this, right?
Yeah, and maybe we don't have to, right? Like I'm happy as a human to set the goal.
Right. Absolutely, that's exactly where I was hoping we would go with this, which is, again, I'm trying to help businesses figure out where they can deploy this and kind of cut through the hype, right? And I think that there's a lot of kind of muddled thinking right now about the ability of these systems to do things like set goals. Like I don't think they're there yet, right? And the thing with these concentric circles is that they represent higher levels of abstraction. Like you need to have both a broader understanding of what you're trying to do at different levels, right? And you also need to have kind of broader context, which I know that the word context in this context has a particular meaning, but I mean here, like you need to have this kind of broader understanding of what the thing is in service to, which we might get to eventually, but we're not quite there yet, right? So in my mind, the best use cases right now entail processes that can be modeled, where you can where humans explicitly take steps in both the goal setting, planning, and reflection stage, and they can be augmented by AIs, right? But and slowly maybe not so slowly, but we will incrementally automate some of these things. But I get the sense that we're not fully there yet for a lot of them.
Yeah,
so a lot of it is going to be modeling these hybrid systems that include humans and LLMs.
It makes a lot of sense. I like the idea of you moving humans in and out, right? And the more out you are, the more human you need. For example, there's an interesting experience which I'm sure you've had, which is if you're working with a reasoning model, the model is reasoning, and you as the human are kind of like reviewing its reasoning to see if it's right. And it's very easy to review somebody's reasoning, right? The model's thinking things through, and you're like, yeah, that's right. Or no, you made a mistake there, kind of thing. So it's this kind of like the human goes to the sides, I guess. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you brought up the reasoning, right? Like one of the things that's implied by this model is that these are different operations,
Uh-huh.
and they require different kinds of reasoning, right? And I think that that's why now we're talking about agents, because we have, well, the model providers have figured out ways of making them reason in different ways. But
Mm-hmm.
the way I think about it is setting goals requires this kind of very high level conceptual reasoning that
Mm-hmm.
allows the system to strategize, right? Um, the planning, planning modality requires a different kind of reasoning. I'm calling it here like tactical reasoning, which is like, okay, so there's a sequence of steps that needs to happen in order to get to this goal, and they need to happen in a particular order. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
understand, well, the system needs to understand what needs to happen and in what sequence to get you to where you want to be. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm calling that kind of tactical reasoning that is centered on sequencing. The acting modality requires what I'm calling operative reasoning, which is being having the understanding of what tools you have access to and which are the most appropriate for different ends, right? So if what the system is trying to do is book a flight, it needs to understand that it has access to
Mm-hmm.
the API of a flight booking system, that it has those credentials, et cetera, right? If it needs to pay for the flight, it needs to have access to some source of funds. And it needs to know that those are things that are available to it. Those are systems that it can talk to, right? So there's this notion of tool selection and use. So it needs to know
Mm-hmm.
about what it has access to. And this is where I see the MCP thing coming in, right? Most obviously, I mean, I understand that it applies to the other faces as well. And then the last step here, the reflection step, um, I think that the kind of reasoning that is needed there is something like causal reasoning. It's like, so I did this and this happened, and I need to be able to be critical of that, right? Like I need to be able to understand that the thing that I expected would happen either did or did not happen, and then switch gears to so that I can do it more effectively the next time around. And that requires at a minimum some kind of telemetry, right? Like the system needs to
Yeah.
have visibility on the effects of its actions, right?
Yeah.
um, and again, I don't know to what degree this for me, like I've been thinking about this kind of in the abstract, right? But I also have a little bit of experience with some of these tools, and it feels to me like it is most capable in the red thing right now. And we're starting to see capabilities in the planning and reflection phases, but it feels to me like it's early days. Is that fair?
Um, I don't know if that's right. So I think in the abstract, the planning and reasoning capabilities, yeah, it's early, right? Because I mean, they just like this was just like trained a year ago. But if I see it when I see it working, it's wildly good in certain contexts of in both planning and reflecting. So, and again, I'm using the code example not because everything is code, but because that's where the early stuff is happening. So if I see how good it is there, it's hard not to think that it's going to get good in more and more domains. And so is it, I think it is already much better than what most people think it is, and they just haven't seen it. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
so yes, on
Hmm.
the one hand, yes, it is clearly early stages. But at the same time, it is already wildly good and can just think through fairly complex things, reflect on them, and it does work to a large degree, which then shows to the promise of what's going to happen next year, the year after, etc. Right? So
It
so
may be worth it may be worth using an example here because you like you said appropriately that most people haven't had experience with it, and it is kind of uncanny, right? So I was doing some work with Claude Code last week, and I'm working on a product, and I found a bug in my product,
yeah.
and I told Cloud Code what I was experiencing, like what the bug I was seeing, and I asked it to figure out what was wrong, right? So that was the extent of my prompting on it. So what does Cloud Code know? Well, Cloud Code knows about my code base, so it has access to the entire code base. It's also obviously been trained on a bunch of things, including the programming language, the frameworks, all that stuff, right? And with that information, it knew enough to think through, do the kind of like tactical reasoning to think through about what might be happening, test the conditions that might serve as evidence for that being the case, implementing a fix, right? So it actually modified the code base, then it tested the fix, found that it was not adequate,
Yes.
and changed its approach, right?
And so this is okay, so this is what I think matters about code. It's not that it's code. It's that the feeling it creates, the excitement, the bafflement, the holy shit, what just happened, right? Is a preview. I mean, I am not a hypester, but there is, and stuff takes longer than people think. But I do think it's a preview of the feelings people will have in their day-to-day work, and little by little, it's gonna do things that are not code. I think, how about this? Maybe we should talk a little bit about regular businesses or, people at work. How should they think about this? Because, I mean, I think yes, agents are real. I'm sorry that I do not like the hype, but I do think stuff is happening there, and I think it takes a long time for these things to get infiltrated and implemented into real work, right? But let's talk about that. Like, what if you're a business owner or somebody who runs a department or whatever the case, or somebody who works somewhere, what should you, how should you think about it even?
I definitely want to cover that, and I actually have a slide with a few points that I thought through. But before getting there, I wanted to add one more thing to this model, which is that the loop can be nested and deep, right? So when we talk about the acting stage, one of the things one of the promises of these systems is that the acting can be delegated to other agents, right? That are independent or somewhat independent and have the ability to set goals, plan, act, and reflect on their own, right? And so this can lead to quite complex systems. And I think that that's significant to your question because I agree with you that agents are a thing. Like, I don't think that this is speculative anymore. And like you, my experiences with Cloud Code have convinced me that this is a technology that has tremendous potential. I'm a little more skeptical that some of the things that we've learned by working with code can be generalized to other business workflows, right? In that, in working with code, we are specifying things like methods. Like you have to think very carefully about like how you implement things, and you have to be much more precise with how you define workflows, right? Than is the case in other areas of life.
I think, sorry. I have the feeling, and I'm just talking about feelings now because I think there is the way to kind of this mirrors into non-coding workflows and use cases and businesses. If am I a lawyer? Am I, whatever I do, I think it reflects through the way you can think about it. And one way to think about it is it's a very, very sharp chef's knife that is a tool best used by experts, but incredibly powerful, right? Another way to think about it could be, I heard somebody say something that I thought was interesting. It's cooking again. It's a little bit like if I'm a chef and I have this really, and in the context of this can work really good if you're an expert at what you do, for example, right? If I am a chef and I have these amazing recipes and I know exactly what to do and how to give people incredible food, but give me a few sous chefs and don't make me cut the carrots.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of those. I think there's a whole bunch of metaphors and a whole bunch of ways of thinking and interesting things that are happening. It's this weird new thing, and we don't quite know where to use it, how to use it, but it's happening really fast. That is my sense.
I like the chef analogy, because anybody can hack about in the kitchen, right? But that doesn't mean that they're going to get good results. And getting good results right now, and this goes to your question, right? Getting good results right now calls for a hell of a lot of mise en place, right? So you have to get everything ready up front. You have
Yeah.
to have the right ingredients. You have to have the right setup for the kitchen. You have to have assigned roles so that you have the sous chef and the people who are going to be I don't know, cleaning the fish or whatever, right? So I think that there's a lot more upfront structure than most people assume is going to be needed right now.
Yeah, I was talking today to somebody, and so in their company, they're non-engineering, right? So in their company, there's this push for everybody. Everybody has to use ChatGPT, right? This is like a new thing. And they give a little bit of like very generic prompt training, just very high level stuff. And this particular person does medical writing, right? Which is very specific, and they're a professional. Now, I think if they are like a really pro at what they do, which is medical writing, which is very specific, they could work on their workflow and kind of create a little chef's tool or a little chef's knife or things that could make them much more productive or offload stuff that they don't want to do, right? It's possible, but it will only work if they get to that, if they do that. If somebody just gives them the blunt knife of generic AI, I think I'm mixing my metaphors here, but there's something there about it's working really well for experts once you get there. And I think that might be a thing. Who knows?
Well, what we have here is, or what is currently extant, is a really sophisticated kitchen. It's not an artificial chef yet. That's the point, right? In that,
Yeah,
if you have the right team in the kitchen, you can do really amazing things.
but it's an artificial sous chef, right?
It might be an artificial sous chef, but you still need a chef in the kitchen,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
and that actually is a good segue to share with you some of the points that I thought we might wrap up with, actually, because we have about 10 minutes here. But
Yeah.
I'm just gonna talk through these and see if you violently disagree with any of them. But the first point, I think, speaks to this kitchen idea, right? Like before implementing an agentic system, you must understand your business's information flows, I don't. I think that it might be there might be a day where you can like point a model to your, I don't know, your communications and say, figure out what's wrong with my business. But we are very far from that, I think. I think that the current use case entail taking a particular task, a particular situation, and looking to improve it somehow, right? Or automate
Yes.
it or expedite it or whatever, right? So that's the second point here. Like in the near term, the best uses are augmenting or accelerating existing processes, right? But that said, and this is something that for me is like a big thing, is you need to be on the lookout for don't automate things that are not worth automating, right? It's like there's this
Uh-huh.
notion, it's like, oh, we can do things faster now. It's like, well, the thing might not be worth doing at all, right? So this is actually an opportunity to take a step back and reevaluate your business processes to
Mhm.
see, what is worth automating. Uh, that said, even if you do map things, it's important to call out the fact that there are no off-the-shelf agentic solutions for your particular information flows. Even something like Claude Code, like you still have to tell it what you want, right? And that's in a very specific domain. I believe, and this might be self-serving because it's part of what Greg and I are doing, and I think it's also part of what you're doing with your partners, right? But I believe that for a while at least, you're going to need help in translating business processes to agentic powered workflows. Um,
Yeah.
and I also believe, and this is where we might disagree, I think that truly agentic systems that span the entire, all the four of those steps, I think that they're currently aspirational. I think they will be aspirational for a while. I don't see, like, I'm not one of these people who believes like AGI is around the corner, right? So I think that this, you're going to need help structuring these things is going to be true for a while.
Yeah, I don't violently I would say one other thing maybe. It's something I find interesting is when a company, I'm thinking about you in a business, right? You do this work, you look at like, what's your value? What are you really good at? What is this one process that it would be really great to kind of like, turn from 3 weeks into 3 days, but but we don't see a way of doing it. I think there's something about doing that work up front that's like strategy work, right? But then having a set of saying like, here's the three processes that we think might be really valuable to turn into agents, or it's all just words, right? Like to kind of like really improve with AI somehow. But we cannot do it today. So maybe we play around with some things. Maybe we do a pilot, but we have now created a set of um, what we call evaluation criteria. This is the process. We write it down. This is what we would need. This is what the outcome should be. And we look at the tech every 6 months, right? And it may be that it takes 2 or 3 years to get there.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the market every 6 months. But we are prepared versus my feeling is a lot of companies are kind of like, running around every, you know, a few months before every major board meeting being like, oh, what's our strategy? No, you can think about these things and you can like set up criteria for stuff that you may not need to act on today. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I mean, you're circling back to where we started, which is you don't want to violate Gall's law, right? Like you want to start small and grow it from there. And the way that I've been approaching this with clients is mapping out the information flow, identifying the points where we can leverage LLMs today, understanding this model, right? Like where there are some things that require sequential reasoning. Can we do those, right? So like understanding the capabilities of the system. And then for the rest of it, acknowledging that there's going to be humans in the loop and much of it is going to be kind of like Wizard of Oz, right? Like It's like we're going to be simulating some of the stuff with the understanding that eventually we might be able to automate those steps as well. But we have to start. We have to start with small steps. Is the sense I get.
Yeah, and you also had a thing that I think you said this recently or in a chat or something, which is really true. Work that people do is never as simple as it seems to be, right?
Yeah.
And I think you had the example, which was, well, sometimes I bend the rules a little bit
Yeah. Yep.
because I know the outcome is going to be better.
Well, that's the thing with code, right? Like using code as an example is like in code you cannot be fuzzy. In real world, like well, not real world. In
Yeah.
other business processes, there's fuzziness involved, right? Like the airline booking example. It's like there might be a storm system or something that derails your plans, right? All of a sudden, everything's up in the air, and there's a lot of the real world can intrude, and and you need to account for that, right?
Yeah. So very promising and also not magic.
Not magic. I'm very excited to be working on this stuff.
Mm.
And I'm looking at the chat right now. There's a question there, and I realize we only have a few minutes here, but where do you think agents add most value? Considering Gall's law, um, polishing the simple SOP stuff, or acting as complexity translators for the messy, evolving workflows where businesses struggle. I don't know. Can you see the chat, Peter?
No, but I heard the question.
Do you have thoughts on this? Like where do they add most value now?
I mean, empirically in coding. I'm sorry, that's
Mhm.
just where if you would add the value worldwide that is being added right now, it's clearly in coding,
Mhm.
right?
I,
Everything
yeah,
else seems to be early experiments as far as I've been able to see.
that's true. I would also suggest that starting with mapping actual information flows can help give you insights as to where you might apply these things, right? Because to the commenter's point, like there are some steps in the process that you might look at and go, oh, that process, that step is primarily about like pattern matching, which is something that these systems are really good at, right? Whereas this other step over here requires a lot of fuzziness because you're dealing with human interactions, for example, which is something that these
Mhm.
systems I don't think are very good at right now.
I,
So
okay, I had to challenge you on something today. Yes, that I will challenge you on that. I agree. This is what I observe. And I've gone in this whole AI thing, I've gone back to like, you know what, my user research kind of like days. I'm just going to observe what's actually happening, right? I think what actually happens is that people trust these systems too much. People listen to these systems, people confide in these systems too much. But that's my challenge to what you said, like if it's about working with people. I see where you're coming from, but
there's a literacy angle here, right? Same thing that happened with social media. It's like we need to learn how to work with these things
yeah,
and how to
yeah,
adapt
yeah.
our work.
Mhm.
So we are coming to the end here, Peter, and I wanted to leave viewers with a sense of where they can follow up. So
That's not our
I
website. That's okay. It starts with get. It's just a very bad domain. Getsimplyput.ai. And you can just email Peter at getsimplyput.ai. There we go.
I am so sorry. I did not. I had
Don't,
the wrong domain.
yeah,
Um, okay, so get simplyput.ai is where they can follow up with you. And for me, it's unfinished. I don't know how to pronounce that yet.
I love your domain name. It is the best domain name I've ever. It's just awesome. Unfinished.
Well, well, thank you, Peter. I hope that we do this again soon.
Yeah, me too.
All right,
And
awesome.
thanks everybody for joining.
Okay.
Did you end the?
I ended the stream. Sorry about that. I I don't know why.